Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you were a ghost? Not some existential crisis about life's meaning or the universe's endless void. No, I mean literally, like you're standing there, flesh and blood, pulse thumping, and yet the world around you acts like you're not even a blip on their radar. That's where Jerome Wilson found himself today, and let me tell you, it wasn't just any day, and this wasn't just any room. Picture this, a man, 47 years old, sharp as a tack, with a fortune built from nothing but grit and vision, standing in a place that should have rolled out the red carpet for him. Instead, he's as good as air. Now here's the kicker. This wasn't some random dive bar or budget motel with flickering neon signs. This was the hotel, a crown jewel in the empire Jerome had clawed his way to create. We're talking five-star, chandelier dripping, your coffee costs more than a steak dinner kind of place. A single night here could burn a hole through most people's wallets, and the guest list read like a who's who of folks who never worry about bills. This was the kind of spot where staff were trained to make you feel like royalty, or at least they were supposed to. Jerome had built this place to be flawless, a machine of hospitality that ran smoother than a Swiss watch. So why the hell was he standing at the front desk, feeling like he'd wandered into someone else's story? It wasn't just a bad mood or a fleeting moment of self-doubt. No, something was off. Jerome wasn't here by accident. Whispers had been creeping up from this hotel, guest complaints piling higher than the overpriced pillows in the suites. Stories of rudeness, rooms mysteriously unavailable, staff with attitudes sharper than the steak knives in the dining room. At first he thought it was a glitch, a few bad apples in a shiny orchard. But the complaints kept coming, each one a little uglier than the last, until they formed a pattern he couldn't ignore. Discrimination, neglect, arrogance. It was like his hotel had forgotten its own damn DNA. Jerome could have done what most CEOs do: fire off an email, summon the manager for a stern Zoom call, maybe order a corporate retraining session, and call it a day. But that wasn't his style. Problems like this didn't vanish with memos or meetings. They festered deep in the bones of a place, and the only way to root them out was to see it for himself. So here he was, no private jet, no flashy suit, no entourage trailing behind him. Just Jerome Wilson, checking in like any other guest, ready to peel back the curtain on his own creation. What he didn't expect was how fast that curtain would rip, or how much it would sting to be the one nobody saw coming. Jerome stepped into the lobby, the kind of place that screamed money without saying a word. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, fresh flowers spilled out of vases bigger than most people's apartments, and the air carried that subtle scent of wealth, clean, crisp, untouchable. It was his vision brought to life, every detail handpicked to make guests feel like they'd stepped into a dream. But dreams could sour, and right now, this one was starting to smell like trouble. He adjusted the collar of his plain jacket, nothing flashy, just enough to blend in, and headed for the front desk. No one needed to know who he was. Not yet. He'd come here for a reason, and it wasn't nostalgia. The complaints had been stacking up like unpaid bills. Guests treated like they were crashing someone's private party, rooms vanishing from the system for certain people, staff acting like they were doing you a favor by showing up to work. It wasn't one bad review on some travel app. It was a pattern, a slow bleed of trust that could sink even an empire like his. Jerome had seen businesses crumble for less. He could have sent in a team of suits to assess the situation, maybe slap a bandage on it with some corporate buzzwords, synergy, optimization, whatever the hell they called it these days. But that was like mopping the floor during a flood. No, he needed to feel the pulse of this place himself, see the cracks up close. So here he was. No warning, no fanfare, just another name on a reservation. Or so he thought. The front desk loomed ahead, a sleek slab of polished wood well, occupied by a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Her name tag read Kim, and everything about her screamed, "I checked out 5 minutes ago." Mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back in a half-hearted ponytail, she was slouched in her chair, phone in hand, thumb scrolling like it was her life's mission. Jerome stood there, right in front of her, a full-grown man with a presence that usually turned heads. Nothing. Not a glance, not a twitch. It was like he'd wandered into a parallel universe where he didn't register. He waited a beat, then another, giving her a chance to notice the living, breathing human being 3 feet away. Still nothing. The lobby hummed around them, guests murmuring, a bellboy pushing a cart, but Kim's world was just her screen, her little bubble of indifference. Jerome cleared his throat, loud enough to cut through the haze. Nada. He tapped the desk, a sharp little rhythm that echoed in the quiet. Kim's eyes flicked up for half a second, then back to her phone, like he was a mosquito she decided to ignore. All right then. Excuse me, he said, keeping his voice steady, polite even. He wasn't here to start a fight, not yet, but he wasn't invisible either. Kim let out a sigh so dramatic it could have won an Oscar. The kind of sigh you save for someone who's ruined your whole damn day just by existing. She dragged her gaze up to meet his, slow as molasses, and blinked like he'd just popped into reality from thin air. No, welcome to our hotel. No, how can I assist you? Just a single flat word. Yeah, like he was an afterthought, a glitch in her evening plans. Jerome felt a spark of something, anger maybe, or just disbelief. This was his hotel, his life's work, and this woman was acting like he'd wandered in off the street begging for scraps. He leaned in slightly, keeping his cool. I have a reservation. Jerome Wilson, simple, direct. Let's see how this plays out. Kim's lips twitched, almost a smirk, like she'd heard a joke she wasn't going to share. She turned to her computer, fingers tapping the keyboard with all the enthusiasm of a kid forced to do chores. Mm-hmm, she muttered, eyes glued to the screen. A pause, then, yeah, nope. Don't see it. She didn't even look at him, just went right back to her phone, scrolling like the conversation was over. Jerome arched a brow, his patience thinning, but still intact. You sure about that? He asked, voice calm but laced with a challenge. He'd dealt with enough people to know when someone was brushing him off, and Kim wasn't even trying to hide it. Pretty sure, she said, not bothering to check again. Her tone was bored, final, like she'd already mentally clocked out, and that's when it hit him. This wasn't just laziness. Something about the way she dismissed him, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes, felt deliberate, like she'd sized him up in 2 seconds and decided he didn't belong here. Not in her lobby, not in her world. Jerome's jaw tightened, but he kept his face neutral. He'd been here before, seen that look, felt that silent judgment. But today was the wrong day to test him. Jerome stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of Kim's pretty sure hanging in the air like a cheap shot. The lobby's glow, those polished floors, the faint hum of wealth, felt like a mockery now, a shiny shell wrapped around something rotten. His hotel, his pride, reduced to this. A front desk clerk who couldn't even fake a smile. Kim's eyes were back on her phone, her thumb flicking through whatever digital void she'd rather live in, as if Jerome was just a breeze that'd blow past. But he wasn't moving, not today. He tilted his head, studying her like a chessboard. Years of building an empire had taught him to read people. Every smirk, every dodge. And Kim was an open book. Arrogance, laziness, and something sharper, something that prickled the back of his neck. She wasn't just blowing him off. She was choosing to. Like she'd taken one glance at him. No suit, no entourage. Maybe the wrong vibe in her eyes. And decided he wasn't worth the keystrokes. He'd seen that look before, felt it in boardrooms and backrooms. The kind of snap judgment that didn't need words to cut deep. But this wasn't a random slight. This was his house, and she was burning it down one guest at a time. Check again, he said, voice low, each word deliberate, like he was handing her a lifeline. He wasn't begging. Jerome Wilson didn't beg, but he was giving her a chance to rethink her game. The air shifted, just a fraction, as if the lobby itself was holding its breath. Kim rolled her eyes, a slow, exaggerated arc that screamed, "You're wasting my time." She let out another sigh. God, she was committed to that performance, and tapped the keyboard with the energy of someone swatting a fly. Nope, she said, popping the EP like a punctuation mark. Still nothing. Sorry. Except she wasn't sorry. Her voice dripped with boredom, her face half buried in that damn phone again. The word sorry sounded like a door slamming shut. Jerome's fingers twitched, itching to grab something. Maybe the desk, maybe his temper. He caught himself, exhaled slow, and kept his face stone-cold neutral. Losing it now would be too easy, too small. He wasn't here to yell at a clerk. He was here to fix a machine that was spitting out rust. But damn, she was making it hard. "All right," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've got my confirmation right here." He pulled out his phone, smooth as you please, and opened the email. Reservation booked, confirmed, time-stamped, the works. He held it up, screen glowing like a spotlight on her lie. "Says I'm good, so what's the problem?" Kim barely glanced at it. Barely. Like his proof was a flyer she'd toss in the trash. "Yeah, well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "the system doesn't lie." Her lips curled, just a hint of a smirk, like she was daring him to keep going. "Maybe you made a mistake. Happens all the time. Wrong hotel, wrong date, easy mix-up." Jerome blinked, letting her words sink in. Wrong hotel? Oh, she was good. Not good at her job. God, no. But good at this little dance, this power trip where she got to play gatekeeper. He tilted his head, voice dropping colder. "You saying I'm lost, Kim?" She didn't miss a beat, that smirk creeping wider, the kind you flash when you think you're untouchable. "I'm saying it's an easy mistake to make. Happens to lots of people." Her tone was syrupy now, condescending, like she was explaining colors to a kid. The lobby was quiet, but Jerome could feel eyes on them. Other guests, maybe a bellboy pretending to polish something. They were watching, sensing the static in the air. He leaned forward just enough to make her shift in her seat. "And if I'm not lost?" he asked, slow, deliberate. "If my reservation's right here, like I know it is, what then?" Kim shrugged, a lazy lift of her shoulders. "Then I guess the system glitched." She said it like it was nothing. Like a glitch explained everything. His time, his dignity, the whole damn mess. But her eyes darted away just for a second, and that was it. That was the tell. Jerome had built his empire on moments like this, catching the flicker of truth behind the bullshit. This wasn't a glitch. This was her. He nodded almost to himself and slipped his phone back into his pocket. "A glitch, huh?" His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes the room feel smaller. Kim didn't notice. She was back to scrolling, thinking she'd won. But Jerome was already 3 steps ahead. He pulled out his second phone, the one tied to the company's internal system, the one nobody at this desk would ever touch. His fingers moved fast, logging in with credentials that could unlock every dirty secret this hotel was hiding. And there it was, plain as day. Reservation, Jerome Wilson. Booked. Confirmed. He scrolled deeper, curiosity burning now, and checked the activity log. One line jumped out like a neon sign. Reservation manually deleted. User, Kim, front desk, bingo. Jerome's lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like a wolf baring teeth. He glanced up at her, still oblivious, still tapping away like she was the queen of this tiny kingdom. "Oh, Kim, you just lit the fuse." He straightened up, pocketing the phone, and let the moment stretch, savoring it. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every guest she'd brushed off, every complaint buried under her shrugs. He'd come here to diagnose a problem, but now he had a name for it. Jerome let the silence hang, heavy as a storm cloud, his eyes locked on Kim like she was a puzzle he'd just cracked wide open. The lobby's hum, soft chatter, the clink of a glass somewhere, faded into nothing. It was just him, her, and the truth glowing on his phone screen. Reservation manually deleted. User, Kim, front desk. Not a glitch, not a mix-up, but a choice. Her choice. And now she was about to learn what choices cost in Jerome Wilson's world. Kim was still glued to her phone, oblivious, her fingers dancing across the screen like she hadn't just stepped on a landmine. Jerome leaned forward, slow, deliberate, resting his elbows on the desk. The move was casual, almost friendly, but it shrank the space between them, made her world feel a little smaller. "Tell me something, Kim," he said, his voice smooth as polished steel. What happens when you delete a reservation? Her head snapped up just a fraction, like she'd heard a sound she didn't expect. For the first time, her thumb stopped scrolling. Oh, it just removes it from the system, she said, her tone trying for bored, but landing somewhere nervous. No big deal. She flicked her eyes back to her phone, like she could hide behind it, like she could outrun the way his question had landed. Jerome nodded, slow, like he was savoring her answer. No big deal, huh? He let the words linger, let them sink into the cracks of her confidence. And who can do that? Delete a reservation, I mean. His tone was still calm, conversational, but there was an edge now, a blade wrapped in velvet. Kim shrugged, but it was stiff, like her shoulders knew something her brain hadn't caught up to yet. Only front desk staff, obviously. She glanced at him, quick, then away. Like me. The words came out bold, but her voice cracked just enough to betray her. She was starting to feel it, the shift, the ground moving under her feet. Like you, Jerome echoed, his lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. He straightened up, pulling his second phone from his pocket again, the one that held the keys to her undoing. He tapped the screen, casual as if he was checking the weather, but his eyes never left her. So Kim, he said, voice dropping lower, why'd you delete my reservation? The question hit like a brick through a window. Kim froze, her phone slipping an inch in her hand. For the first time all night, she looked at him, really looked at him, and her face flickered with something raw. Panic, maybe, or the dawning realization that she'd miscalculated. Badly. Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping on dry land. No words, just a deer-in-headlights stare that said she hadn't planned for this. Jerome turned the phone around, slow, deliberate, letting her see the screen. There it was in black and white, her name, her action, time-stamped like a digital confession. Kim, front desk, reservation deleted. Her eyes darted to it, then back to him, and for a split second, he almost felt bad. Almost. But then he remembered the complaints, the guests dismissed, the trust she'd chipped away with every shrug and smirk. Nah, she'd earned this moment. She started, her voice a squeak now, all that bravado gone like smoke. I didn't. I mean, I... She fumbled, her hands twitching like she wanted to rewind time, erase the evidence, anything to claw her way out of this hole. But there was no back button for this one. Jerome raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't, he said, sharp but quiet, like a warning shot. Don't even try it. The words landed soft but heavy, and Kim flinched, her face draining of color. Beautiful. He could have ended it there, could have called the manager and let corporate gears grind her down. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. This wasn't just about her. It was about every time someone walked into his hotel and left feeling like nothing. He needed to see how far this went, how deep the rot had spread. He leaned back, folding his arms, letting the silence do the work. The lobby was watching now, not even pretending to mind its own business. A couple by the fountain glanced over, their whispers fading. A bellboy slowed his cart, eyes wide like he was catching a live show. Jerome didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you mess with the wrong guest. Here's what's gonna happen, he said, his voice steady, each word a brick in a wall she couldn't climb. You're gonna find me a room, right now. It wasn't a request, it was a command, delivered with the kind of calm that makes spines straighten. Kim hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like she was weighing her options. But his stare didn't waver, and she must have seen something in it, something that said, this is your last chance. Because she started typing, fast, her hands shaking just enough to notice. Okay, she muttered, barely audible, her eyes glued to the screen like it could save her. The keys clacked under her fingers, frantic now, a far cry from her earlier sloth routine. I found a room. Her voice was small, defeated, and she slid a key card across the desk without looking up, like she couldn't bear to meet his eyes. Jerome didn't touch it. Not yet. He glanced at the card, then back at her, his expression unreadable. Which room? He asked, his tone neutral but loaded, like he already knew the answer. Kim swallowed, her throat bobbing. Uh, 1427, she said, rushing the words out, hoping speed would make them sound better. It didn't. Jerome's brow lifted, just a fraction, and now he let himself smile. A small, dangerous thing. Room 1427. Of course, the worst room in the house, tucked by the elevators, where the hum of machinery and the stink of the dumpster out back were your only company. He knew every inch of this hotel. He'd designed it, dreamed it, built it from nothing. And Kim thought she could slip this past him, thought she could play him like some clueless tourist. Oh, she was bold. Stupid, but bold. He picked up the key card, slow, turning it over in his fingers like it was evidence in a trial. 1427, he said, almost to himself, letting the number hang there. Kim shifted, uncomfortable, her eyes darting anywhere but him. The lobby felt smaller now, the air thicker, like everyone knew something was coming. And it was. Jerome pocketed the card, his mind already racing ahead. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Kim had just handed him the match, and he was about to light this place up. Jerome held the key card between his fingers, room 1427's number, staring back like a middle finger from Kim. He could feel her eyes on him, quick and skittish, waiting for him to react, to take the bait. The lobby was a pressure cooker now, guests pretending to read their phones, a bellboy polishing the same spot on his card like it was his life's mission. They all knew something was up, even if they didn't know what. Jerome didn't give them a show, not yet. He slipped the card into his pocket, slow and deliberate, and gave Kim a look that wasn't angry, wasn't smug, just empty, like she was a math problem he'd already solved. Thanks, Kim, he said, voice flat, and turned toward the elevators. Each step echoed on the marble, steady as a heartbeat, but inside his mind was a war room. Room 1427 wasn't just a bad room, it was a statement. Kim thought she could play him, thought she could salvage her little power trip by sticking him in the hotel's armpit. Next to the rattling elevators where the dumpsters stink seeped through the walls. Big mistake. Jerome hadn't just built this place. He'd memorized every corner, every flaw. He'd fought for every window, every tile, back when investors laughed at his dreams. He knew 1427 like he knew his own scars, and Kim handing it to him wasn't a coincidence. It was a confession. She wasn't just bad at her job. She was poison, and poison didn't spread on its own. He didn't head to the room, though, not yet. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, but Jerome veered left, past a potted fern bigger than most people's egos, and slipped into a quiet hallway off the lobby. He needed space to think, to dig. This wasn't about one clerk anymore. It was about a system letting her think she could get away with it. He pulled out his laptop from the slim bag slung over his shoulder, propped it on a decorative table that probably cost more than a car, and logged into the hotel's internal network. His fingers moved fast. Muscle memory from years of late nights and hard calls. Guest complaints, staff records, manager reports. He wanted it all raw and unfiltered, like peeling back skin to see the bone. The screen lit up with data, and damn, it was uglier than he'd expected. Complaints stretched back months, some older than that, a digital graveyard of pissed-off guests. Front desk refused to honor my booking, said system error. Staff ignored my complaint about a dirty room. Felt judged at check-in, like I didn't belong. One word kept popping up, sharp as a splinter. Kim. Kim dismissed a guest's issue without logging it. Kim cited policy, but wouldn't explain. Guest reported possible discrimination at front desk. Kim involved. It wasn't a few bad days, it was a pattern. Deliberate as a signature. She wasn't slipping up. She was choosing who got service and who got screwed, and she'd been doing it for a while. Jerome's jaw tightened, the kind of slow clench that came before a storm. He scrolled further, chasing the why. Kim wasn't a mastermind. She was too sloppy for that. So how the hell was she still here? Why hadn't someone yanked her badge and shown her the door? The answer hit like a punch. Stephen Lane, general manager. His name was all over the reports, or rather, his absence was. Complaints flagged for review, never followed up. Issues escalated to his desk, left to rot. One guest had written, "Manager promised to investigate, never heard back." Another, "Stephen said it was handled, but nothing changed." Spineless didn't even begin to cover it. Stephen wasn't managing. He was hiding, letting Kim run her little fiefdom while he played yes man to corporate memos. Jerome leaned back, exhaling through his nose, the air hissing like a pressure valve. He'd seen guys like Stephen before, middle managers who coasted on charm and excuses, dodging conflict like it was a bullet. But this wasn't some corner store. This was his empire, his name etched into every detail of this place. Stephen's job was to keep the wheels turning, not to let them rust while Kim played gatekeeper. The complaints weren't just about bad service. They were about trust, about people walking into Jerome's world and leaving with a sour taste. That wasn't business. That was personal. He snapped the laptop shut, the sound sharp in the empty hallway. His blood was up now, not raging but focused, like a laser cutting through fog. Kim was a problem, sure, but she was a symptom. Stephen was the disease, letting the rot spread under his nose. Jerome could have called it a night, taken his key to 1427, and let the system limp along till morning. But that wasn't him. He'd built this hotel from nothing. Sweat, deals, nights he didn't sleep. And he wasn't about to let it slide into mediocrity because a clerk and her boss thought they could coast. He stood slinging the bag back over his shoulder and headed for the lobby again. The elevator could wait. Room 1427 could wait. Right now he had a manager to find and a message to deliver. Nobody screws with Jerome Wilson's empire and walks away clean. Not Kim, not Stephen, not anyone. The hallway stretched out before him, cool and quiet, but his steps carried weight, like the first rumbles of a quake nobody saw coming. Jerome's steps echoed down the hallway, each one a countdown to something inevitable. The quiet was a lie. This place wasn't calm. It was a bomb waiting for a spark, and he was carrying the match. Kim's name burned in his mind, her smirk, her shrugs, the way she'd handed him room 1427 like a slap. But it wasn't just her. Stephen Lane, the manager who'd let this hotel slide into a customer service swamp, was the real ghost haunting this place. Jerome had built an empire on trust. Every guest, every stay, a promise. And Stephen had let it erode while hiding behind a desk. That ended tonight. The lobby hit him like a wave as he stepped back in, all soft lights and fake serenity. The crowd had thinned a bit, late-night check-ins trickling off, but the air still crackled, like everyone could smell the trouble brewing. Kim was at the front desk, her posture stiffer now, like she sensed the ground wasn't as solid as she'd thought. Good. Let her sweat. Jerome didn't look at her, not yet. His eyes scanned the room, landing on a frosted glass door tucked behind a potted palm. Manager's office. Stephen was in there, probably shuffling papers or pretending to care about emails, anything to avoid the mess on his doorstep. Jerome crossed the lobby, his stride deliberate, cutting through the space like a blade. A guest in a tailored suit glanced up from her phone, then away like she'd caught a glimpse of something dangerous. Maybe she had. He didn't knock when he reached the door, just pushed it open and stepped inside, letting it swing shut with a soft thud that felt louder than it was. Stephen Lane looked up from his desk, a middle-aged guy with thinning hair and the kind of face that screamed I peaked in high school. His eyes widened, then darted around like he was hoping for an escape hatch. Too late. "Mr. Wilson," Stephen stammered, half standing, his chair scraping the floor. What a surprise." His voice was all nerves, like he'd been caught cheating on a test. He fumbled with a pen, dropping it, and Jerome almost laughed. This was the guy running his hotel? This sweaty, blinking mess? "Cut it, Stephen," Jerome said, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. The move was casual, but it blocked the exit, and Stephen noticed. "We need to talk." Stephen swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in a storm. Of course. Of course. What can I do for you?" He tried to smile, but it was shaky, like he knew the answer was going to hurt. Jerome didn't smile back. He stepped forward slow, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "You know what's happening at your front desk, Stephen?" His voice was low, steady, but it carried weight, like a judge reading a verdict. Stephen blinked, his hands twitching on the desk. Uh, well, I think everything's fine. It came out like a question, weak, like he was begging Jerome to agree. Wrong move. Wrong answer, Jerome said, his tone sharpening just enough to cut. He pulled out his phone, not the corporate one, just enough to make a point, and set it on the desk, screen dark but heavy with what he'd found. I just had my reservation deleted by your star employee out there. Kim, he let the name land, watching Stephen's face for a reaction. Stephen turned pale, his mouth opening like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. What? Who? He managed, but it was pathetic, a kid caught with crumbs on his face. Jerome grinned, but it wasn't friendly. Take a wild guess. He leaned in, just a fraction, enough to make Stephen shrink back. Kim, the one you've let run wild for months, maybe years, dismissing guests, dodging complaints, picking who gets a room and who gets a shrug. Ring any bells? Stephen's eyes flicked to the door, like he could will it to open and save him. It was Kim, wasn't it? He said, voice barely above a whisper, like saying her name might summon her. He winced, rubbing his neck. Listen, Mr. Wilson, I was going to handle it, I swear. She's been challenging, but I thought... Jerome cut him off with a raised hand, sharp, like slamming a gavel. Shut up, Stephen. The words were quiet but final, and Stephen's mouth snapped shut so fast it was almost funny. Almost. Jerome took a deep breath, letting the silence claw at the guy's nerves. You thought? You thought. You've had complaints piling up like garbage, and you did nothing. Training? Meetings? You didn't even try. You let her turn my hotel into her playground. Stephen looked like he wanted to melt into the floor, his hands gripping the desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I thought maybe she just needed more time, more training, he stammered. She's good with some guests, and Jerome laughed, a short, harsh sound that made Stephen flinch. Training? He shook his head, disbelief dripping from the word. This isn't some intern who forgot the Wi-Fi password, Stephen. She's a problem, your problem, and you let it fester. He straightened, his voice dropping colder. You know what that makes you? Useless. Stephen's face crumbled, but Jerome wasn't done. He stepped back, giving the guy just enough room to breathe, to think he might wiggle out. Here's how this goes down, he said, each word measured, deliberate. You're going to walk out there right now, and you're going to fire her, in front of everyone. Stephen's jaw dropped, his eyes bugging out like Jerome had asked him to jump off a cliff. Right. Right now? He croaked, his voice barely holding together. But right now, Jerome repeated, leaning forward again, his stare unrelenting. No buts, no delays. You do it, or I'll do it myself, and then I'll be looking for a new manager. Your call. Stephen hesitated, his hands shaking, but Jerome's eyes didn't budge, and something in them, something hard, unyielding, must have clicked. He nodded, slow, like a man walking to the gallows. Okay, he whispered, barely audible. Okay. Jerome stepped aside, opening the door with a mock flourish. After you, he said, his tone dry as dust. Stephen stumbled out, his face white as a sheet, and Jerome followed, close enough to keep him honest. The lobby was a stage now, every eye turning as Stephen shuffled toward the front desk. Kim looked up, her smirk faltering when she saw her boss's expression, and Jerome behind him, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. Stephen stopped in front of her, his voice trembling but loud enough to carry. Kim, he said, swallowing hard, you're fired, effective immediately. The words landed like a thunderclap, and the lobby went dead silent. Kim's face twisted, shock, then anger, then something desperate. What? She snapped, her voice rising. You can't. You're joking, right? This is a misunderstanding. She laughed, but it was shrill, cracking at the edges. She looked at Stephen, then at Jerome, and for the first time, she seemed to realize she wasn't in control. Stephen shook his head. his eyes on the floor. "It's done," he muttered, barely audible. Kim's gaze darted around, searching for an out, but the lobby was a jury. Guests staring, staff frozen, nobody stepping in to save her. She tried to speak, her mouth working, but nothing came out. Finally, she grabbed her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and stormed toward the exit, throwing one last venomous glance at Jerome. He didn't flinch, just smiled, small and sharp, like a man who'd played his hand and won. The door slammed behind her, and the lobby exhaled, whispers rippling through the crowd. Stephen turned to Jerome, wiping sweat from his brow, like he expected a pat on the back. "I handled it," he said, voice weak, hopeful. Jerome's smile didn't waver, but his eyes were cold. "No, Stephen," he said, stepping closer, his voice low enough that only Stephen heard. "I handled it. You just pulled the trigger." Stephen's face fell, and Jerome turned away, already thinking past him. Firing Kim was a start, but this hotel needed more than a quick fix. It needed a reckoning, and he was just getting started. The lobby was still buzzing, a low hum of whispers and stolen glances as Kim's exit left a hole in the air. Her slammed door echoed like a gunshot, but Jerome didn't flinch. He stood near the front desk, arms crossed, his shadow stretching long across the marble like it owned the place. Because it did. Stephen hovered nearby, wiping sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting like he thought a gold star was coming for firing Kim. Poor guy. He had no idea the real storm was just rolling in. Jerome's gaze swept the room, taking it all in. The guests clutching their cocktails, the bellboy frozen mid-step, the remaining clerks behind the desk trying to look busy while sneaking peeks. They'd all seen Kim's fall, felt the shift, but they didn't know why. Not yet. He could feel their curiosity, their unease like static before lightning. Good, let it build. He'd spent the night invisible, a ghost in his own empire. But ghosts don't fix things. Kings do. And it was time to remind everyone who ruled this castle. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until he was dead center in the lobby, where the chandelier's light hit him like a spotlight. The whispers died fast, eyes locking onto him like he'd flipped a switch. Stephen shuffled closer, probably thinking he could ride this moment, but Jerome ignored him. This wasn't his stage. "Listen up," Jerome said, his voice steady, not loud but caring like it was wired to every corner. "Things are about to change around here. Fast." The words landed hard, rippling through the crowd. A young clerk, early 20s, nervous energy, nodded quick, like he was afraid to disagree. "Yes, sir," he stammered, then hesitated, his brow creasing. Do you work for corporate?" Jerome grinned, sharp and slow, the kind of grin that says you're about to learn something. He let the question hang, let the room lean in. The clerk's words were a spark, and he was ready to light the fire. "Something like that," he said, casual, but his eyes were locked on the kid, then flicked to the others. Clerks, bellboys, even a guest or two who'd edged closer. They were all waiting, holding their breath for the punchline. He reached for the hotel phone on the desk, picking it up like it was a prop in a play he'd written. The clerk flinched, like he'd grabbed a loaded gun. Jerome dialed a number from memory, his fingers moving with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The line clicked, and he spoke, voice clear, deliberate, each word a brick in a wall nobody could tear down. "This is Wilson," he said. "Shut this hotel down for a full-scale audit. Every guest compensated, every complaint reviewed, every employee reevaluated. If they can't cut it, they're gone. Effective immediately." The lobby froze, like time itself had hit pause. Jaws dropped, eyes widened, and someone, a woman near the couches, actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The young clerk's face went slack, his brain scrambling to catch up. "Wait," he blurted, voice cracking. You're the Jerome Wilson?" Jerome pocketed the phone, his grin widening just a fraction, enough to show he was enjoying this. "Yeah," he said, letting the words settle, heavy as truth. "I'm that Jerome Wilson." He straightened his jacket, a small move that felt like planting a flag. The room was his now, every inch of it, and they all knew it. The silence broke like a dam, whispers exploding into murmurs, then voices overlapping. The owner? Jerome Wilson? Oh my God, that's him? The bellboy dropped his polishing rag, staring like he'd seen a ghost turn solid. A guest in a silk scarf clutched her husband's arm, muttering something about Forbes. Stephen, though. Stephen looked like he'd been punched in the soul, his face gray, his knees wobbling like they might give out. He opened his mouth probably to beg, but no sound came. Just as well. Jerome wasn't here for apologies. He turned to the staff, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. This hotel's my blood, he said, each word deliberate, raw. Every room, every light, every damn tile. I built it to mean something. Trust, respect. You don't get to spit on that and keep a badge. His eyes landed on the clerks, then Stephen, who flinched like he'd been slapped. Kim's gone, but she's not the only one who's been slacking. You want to stay, prove you belong, because I'm watching now. The room was electric, every word sinking in like a vow. The young clerk nodded, frantic, like he'd run through fire to keep his job. Another staffer, a woman with tight braids, looked down, her hands twisting like she was replaying every shift she'd ever worked. The guests were riveted, some nodding, others snapping sneaky photos, probably itching to tweet, "Caught the Hotel King cleaning house." Jerome didn't care. This wasn't PR, it was principle. He stepped back, letting his words settle, but his mind was already racing ahead. Kim's firing was a spark. This audit would be the blaze. Every complaint he'd read, every ignored guest, every glitch that wasn't, would get answers. Every dime spent here would be honored, every wrong righted. He'd make damn sure nobody walked out of his hotel feeling like he had tonight. Not ever again. The elevator loomed behind him, its doors gleaming, but he wasn't done. Not quite. Stephen was still standing there, a sweaty statue, and Jerome could feel the guy's panic like heat off pavement. One last loose end, and he knew exactly how to tie it. He turned slow, his eyes locking onto Stephen with a look that said, "Your turn's coming." The lobby held its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop, and Jerome was ready to bring the house down. The lobby was a live wire, humming with the aftershock of Jerome's words. His reveal, "I'm that Jerome Wilson," had hit like a grenade, and the pieces were still settling. Wide-eyed clerks, guests whispering like they'd witnessed a coup. The chandelier's glow casting long shadows that felt heavier now. Stephen stood rooted near the front desk, his face a sickly shade of gray, sweat beading like he was one breath from collapsing. Jerome's eyes locked onto him, steady, unyielding, like a predator sizing up the last thing moving. The air crackled, everyone waiting for the final swing, and Jerome was ready to deliver. He stepped towards Stephen, slow, each footfall a drumbeat in the silence. The manager flinched, his hands twitching like he wanted to bolt, but knew there was nowhere to run. "Stephen," Jerome said, his voice low, almost soft, but it carried the weight of a verdict. "You got anything to say for yourself?" Stephen's mouth worked, opening and closing like he was fishing for a lifeline. "Mr. Wilson, please," he croaked, his voice raw, desperate. I did what you asked. I fired Kim, just like you said. I can fix this, I swear." He leaned forward, hands clasped like he was praying, his eyes darting to the staff, the guests, anyone who might back him up. Nobody did. Jerome tilted his head, letting the plea hang, letting Stephen squirm. He could have ended it quick, but quick wasn't justice. Quick was letting this guy think he'd ever been close to good enough. "Fix this?" Jerome repeated, his tone slicing through the hope in Stephen's voice. "You had months, Stephen. Years, maybe. Complaints stacked up like trash, guests walking out feeling like dirt. And you? You sat in that office, signing off on nothing, letting Kim run her game, while you played invisible." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Stephen like a sentence. "You didn't fix this hotel. You broke it." Stephen staggered back, his knees buckling, but the desk caught him. But I tried," he stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't know it was this bad, I swear." His eyes were wet now, pathetic, but Jerome's face didn't budge. Pity was for people who deserved it. "Tried?" Jerome's laugh was short, cold, like a door slamming shut. This isn't a participation trophy, Stephen. This is my empire, my name. You don't get to try and call it enough. He straightened, his voice dropping to a growl that filled the room. You're done. Pack your shit and go. The words landed like a guillotine, and Stephen froze, his breath hitching. The lobby was dead silent, every eye on him. Clerks clutching clipboards, a guest mid-sip of her wine, the bellboy who'd finally stopped pretending to polish anything. Stephen's face crumpled, like his whole world had caved in, and for a second, Jerome thought he might beg again. But then he just nodded, slow, defeated, and shuffled toward his office, his shoulders hunched like a man who'd lost everything. The door clicked shut behind him, and it was over. Or almost. Jerome turned to the staff, his gaze sweeping across them like a searchlight. They stiffened, some meeting his eyes, others looking anywhere else. Don't think this is just about them, he said, his voice steady but fierce, like a warning carved in stone. This hotel's getting cleaned from top to bottom. Every mistake, every shortcut, you're all on notice. You want to keep your jobs? Earn it, because I don't carry dead weight. The young clerk from earlier nodded so fast it was almost comical, his hands shaking as he gripped the desk. The woman with tight braids bit her lip, her eyes sharp, like she was already planning how to prove herself. Good. They'd need that fire. Jerome's empire wasn't just walls and bookings. It was a promise, and he'd burn it down before he let it rot. He pulled out his phone again, already moving to the next step. Calls to make, orders to give. First Kim, blacklisted, her name flagged across every hotel he owned. She'd never check in a guest or delete a reservation again, not in his world. Then the guests, every complaint he'd read, every name on that digital graveyard, would get a refund, a comped stay, a handwritten apology if that's what it took. He'd make damn sure they knew what his hotel stood for, what he stood for. The audit was already rolling. Teams would descend by morning, tearing through records, retraining staff, fixing every crack Kim and Stephen had ignored. This wasn't a Band-Aid, it was surgery. A knock at the elevator broke his focus. His suite, finally. He could have gone up, poured a drink, let the night fade. But he lingered, taking in the lobby one last time. The marble gleamed, the flowers still spilled from their vases. But it felt different now, like a battlefield after the smoke cleared. He'd walked in tonight as nobody, felt the sting of being nothing, and walked out as king. The staff knew it, the guests knew it, and soon every hotel in his empire would feel it. Jerome poured himself a mental drink, savoring the weight of what he'd done. Kim was gone, Stephen was history, and the hotel would rise stronger, sharper, like a blade forged in fire. He stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft ding, and as the lobby vanished, he smiled, small and sure. Nobody would forget who the hell he was. Not tonight, not ever.